In the stormy aftermath of revolution, when the old world crumbled and new ideas were born in blood and fire, a man emerged who would challenge kings, redraw maps, and ignite the imagination of generations to come. A man whose name became legend, Napoleon Bonaparte. Let's dive into a story how it all began. Born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, Napoleon entered a world in flux. Corsica had only recently become a part of France, and though his family was of minor nobility, they were neither rich nor powerful. From a young age, Napoleon exhibited an intense ambition and fierce intelligence. He spoke French with a Corsican accent, was often solitary, and buried himself in books on history and warfare. He was not a charismatic child, but he was determined. At the age of 9, he was sent to mainland France to attend military school. He was an outsider, mocked for his heritage and accent, yet he excelled in mathematics, geography, and military strategy. By the time he graduated from the prestigious École Militaire in Paris, Napoleon had already begun dreaming of greatness. He entered the army as a second lieutenant of artillery, but his rise would be anything but ordinary. The French Revolution, beginning in 1789, tore the country apart, abolishing the monarchy and creating a vacuum of power. While others fled or fell victim to the chaos, Napoleon saw opportunity. In 1793, during the siege of Toulon, Napoleon caught the attention of the revolutionary government with his decisive use of artillery. The port city had been seized by royalists and British forces. Napoleon orchestrated a daring plan to recapture it, and his success earned him rapid promotion. At just 24, he became a brigadier general. His momentous rise continued in 1795, when he defended the revolutionary government against a royalist uprising in Paris. He used artillery with devastating precision, later calling it a whiff of grapeshot. The rebellion was crushed, and the young general became a hero of the Republic. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French army of Italy. There, his true genius unfolded. He transformed a demoralized and poorly supplied army into a formidable force. Over a brilliant campaign, he defeated the Austrians and their allies in a series of battles that cemented his reputation. Lodi, Arcole, Rivoli. At Lodi, he audaciously led his troops across a narrow bridge under heavy fire, breaking the Austrian line. At Arcole, he famously seized a flag and rallied his men through a swamp. At Rivoli, his use of interior lines and rapid maneuver crushed a superior enemy force. He moved fast, struck hard, and inspired absolute loyalty among his men. He was not just a general, he was a legend in the making. While in Italy, Napoleon also revealed his political skills. He negotiated treaties, reorganized territories, and enriched France with the spoils of war. His dispatches home glorified his victories and carefully crafted his image. France, weary of revolution and bloodshed, began to see him as a savior. In 1798, Napoleon set his sights beyond Europe. He launched an ambitious expedition to Egypt, hoping to undermine British power in the East and establish a new empire. On land, he won the Battle of the Pyramids, defeating the Mamluks with innovative tactics. His infantry squares repelled cavalry charges with surgical discipline. But at sea, his fleet was destroyed by Admiral Nelson in the Battle of the Nile, stranding the French forces. The campaign faltered, but Napoleon's mystique remained intact. Back in France, political chaos had returned. The Directory, a weak 5-man government, was floundering. Sensing his moment, Napoleon returned and seized power in a coup d'état in November 1799. He abolished the Directory and established the consulate, naming himself First Consul. With the support of the army and the people, he became the de facto ruler of France. Over the next few years, Napoleon consolidated his power. He reformed the administration, centralized authority, stabilized the economy, and brought an end to the long wars of the Revolution. His crowning achievement was the Napoleonic Code, a new legal framework based on equality before the law, secular governance, and meritocracy. Though progressive in many ways, it also reinforced patriarchal authority and curtailed civil liberties. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. By taking the crown from the Pope's hands and placing it on his own head, he signaled that his authority came from himself, not from divine right. Europe watched with alarm. One by one, Napoleon's enemies formed coalitions to stop him, but he responded with lightning-fast campaigns. In 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, he defeated the combined Austrian and Russian armies in what is considered his greatest victory. With a brilliant feint, he drew the Allies into attacking his right flank, then split their center in a masterstroke. The battlefield became a symbol of his tactical brilliance. In 1806, he crushed the Prussians at the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt. At Jena, Napoleon's forces outmaneuvered and overwhelmed a hesitant Prussian army. At Auerstedt, Marshal Davout's corps, outnumbered 2-1, achieved a stunning victory, showcasing the strength of Napoleon's military system. Berlin was occupied and Prussia brought to its knees. At Friedland in 1807, he decisively defeated the Russians, forcing Tsar Alexander I to seek peace. The treaties of Tilsit redrew the map of Europe. Napoleon dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, created the Confederation of the Rhine, and placed his brothers and loyal marshals on the thrones of satellite states. Yet with each triumph came resistance. The continental system, Napoleon's attempt to blockade Britain and cripple its economy, backfired. It hurt France's allies more than it did Britain and bred resentment. In Spain, his decision to replace the Bourbon king with his brother Joseph ignited a brutal guerrilla war. British troops under the Duke of Wellington joined the fight, and the Peninsular War became a bleeding wound. Still, Napoleon pressed on. In 1812, he launched his most ambitious campaign yet, the invasion of Russia. With an army of over 600,000 men, the Grand Army marched east. It was the largest force Europe had ever seen, a multinational army composed of soldiers from across the French Empire and its client states. But the scale of the campaign was matched only by its eventual disaster. Napoleon expected a swift campaign. He believed that by marching quickly and defeating Russian forces in a decisive battle, he could force Tsar Alexander I to the negotiating table. But the Russians refused to play by his rules. They retreated deeper into their vast land, drawing Napoleon further from his supply lines. As they fell back, they employed scorched earth tactics, destroying villages, burning crops, poisoning wells. The land became barren, the people gone. The French soldiers marched through silence and smoke. At Smolensk in August 1812, the Russians briefly engaged, but then burned the city and retreated again. The French took the ruins at great cost, but gained no strategic advantage. The heat of summer turned to the chill of early autumn. Supplies dwindled. Desertions grew. Still, Napoleon pushed forward. Finally, on September 7, 1812, the Russians made their stand at Borodino, just outside Moscow. It was one of the bloodiest battles in history. The French launched relentless attacks against the Russian fortifications, including the Great Redoubt and the Bagration flèches. Fighting was fierce and chaotic. Marshal Ney led multiple charges. Murat's cavalry surged forward in clouds of dust and smoke. Russian resistance was heroic. General Kutuzov held the line until late afternoon, but was eventually forced to withdraw. The French suffered around 30,000 casualties, the Russians even more. Napoleon won a tactical victory but failed to destroy the Russian army. It was a hollow triumph. Napoleon entered Moscow expecting surrender. Instead, he found the city abandoned and soon engulfed in flames. Fires raged for days, likely set by Russian partisans. There was no peace offering, no Tsar, no supplies. The French were trapped. As weeks passed and no diplomatic breakthrough came, Napoleon made the painful decision to retreat. Winter was coming. The return journey became a nightmare. Temperatures plummeted. Horses died by the thousands. Wagons broke apart. Frostbite, starvation, and exhaustion ravaged the troops. Bands of Cossacks harassed them endlessly, picking off stragglers. The once mighty Grande Armée disintegrated. The crossing of the Berezina River in November 1812 symbolized the catastrophe. Under relentless Russian attack and freezing conditions, French engineers built makeshift bridges. Thousands drowned or froze as chaos erupted. Napoleon barely escaped with his life. Of the 600,000 men who had marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. It was one of the most catastrophic military failures in history. The Russian campaign marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall. Europe united once again. In 1813, the Sixth Coalition defeated Napoleon at Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations. Over 500,000 troops clashed. It was the largest battle in European history at that time, and it broke Napoleon's hold on Germany. By 1814, Allied forces entered Paris. Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to the island of Elba. But the emperor was not done. In 1815, he escaped Elba and returned to France. His dramatic march to Paris, known as the 100 Days, was met with cheers. Soldiers sent to arrest him joined him instead. The king fled. Napoleon was back. Europe moved swiftly. At Waterloo, in June 1815, Napoleon faced the armies of Britain and Prussia. Despite early success, delays and reinforcements turned the tide. The French were defeated. It was his final battle. Napoleon surrendered and was exiled once more, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There, surrounded by a small group of loyal followers and under British watch, he lived out his final years in isolation. He wrote memoirs, justified his rule, and shaped his legacy. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died. Officially, the cause was stomach cancer, but speculation and conspiracy theories persist to this day. His legacy, however, was far from buried. Napoleon's impact on the modern world is undeniable. He redefined warfare with his emphasis on speed, maneuver, and decisive engagement. His administrative reforms brought lasting change to France and influenced systems across Europe and beyond. The Napoleonic Code remains a cornerstone of civil law in many countries. He inspired both admiration and fear. To liberals, he was a champion of merit and modernity. To monarchs, he was a dangerous usurper. To nationalists, he awakened a new sense of identity. To militaries, he became a model to study and to fear. More than 2 centuries later, Napoleon remains a figure of fascination, a symbol of ambition unbound, of brilliance and hubris intertwined. His life was a meteoric rise and a thunderous fall. But in the end, Napoleon Bonaparte was more than a man. He was a force, a storm that reshaped the world. And though he died in exile, far from the glory of empire, his name still echoes in the halls of power, in the pages of law, and in the imagination of history. Napoleon once said, "What is history but a fable agreed upon? Perhaps. But in his case, the fable is unforgettable." If you enjoyed this journey through the life of one of history's most fascinating figures, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the turning points of the past. Which historical figure should we explore next? Let us know in the comments. Thank you, and see you later.